Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. On today's episode, we have got Mr. Harrison Jack Schmitt behind me on the Apollo 17 mission 50 years ago. They landed on the moon on December 11th, 1972, and coincidentally, 50 years later, the Artemis 1 Orion spacecraft is going to splash down in the Pacific Ocean on December 11th, 50 years to the day that the lunar module number 12 that Grumman built, called Challenger, rested on the moon at a place called Taurus Littrow. And we're going to talk about Mr. Harrison Jack Schmitt, middle name Hagen, and Tom Usiak. I know you're watching, and he knew that. We were teasing you with it yesterday. As my co-producer Marty Winkel and I, we do a week-to-week of Apollo 17, the last human voyage to the moon 50 years ago this month. Like I said, they landed on December 11th and lifted off December 14th. So we'll talk some more about it next week also. But today we're going to feature about some of my personal experiences with Jack Schmitt. Because I had the privilege of covering him as a news media person and a personal photographer for a theater that hired him to come to East Tennessee many years ago. And Jack Schmitt was also a frequent guest professor at the University of Tennessee for a geologist named Larry Taylor, who's passed away. Larry Taylor's responsible for creating artificial lunar regolith with Schmitt's help. So we're going to see some pictures and look back a little bit, but most importantly, see what this important astronaut, the only geologist to go to the moon, the only person to go to the moon that didn't have a military background, Jack Schmitt. He also parlayed his fame into a term as a U.S. state senator for 6 years as a Republican senator from his home state of New Mexico. So stay tuned for that today. Stay curious. Marty, good to see you today. We've had a great week with guests and different things thrown at us all week. And we saw a beautiful twilight launch last night, didn't we, Marty?
We sure did. It was a really good launch. And if you watch the booster come down with binoculars, it was like fireworks. I don't know if you saw that or not.
I didn't have binoculars through my long lens. I did, and we're going to see some of those fireworks here with some photographs from Carlton Bailey, ASM friend and supporter there. This is his launch shot of the. Now this, Marty, this wasn't so well publicized that they were publicized. These were OneWeb communication satellites, but this is SpaceX's competition, OneWeb, with their constellation of Starlink satellites. So there's about 40 OneWeb satellites on this. That company's building its own infrastructure of communications up there. So yeah, it was a pretty launch. Marty, I actually thought it was noisier where we were at than the Artemis launch we heard. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. It was quite loud. It was good.
Yeah, there was a good rumble there, and that all depends on wind direction and stuff. But Carlton, there's his nice launch. Look at that nice little orange on the Falcon 9 as it's going up to space. I put on Facebook the stats of this. There is the booster separation of the first stage and the second stage, and then the landing. So cool. Wait, we missed one there. I don't know why that other picture of the streak. Oh, I got him out of place. That's why. That's the booster landing, and there's when the hot vapors of that engine hit the cold air about a mile up. It starts creating this beautiful stream there. Nice, beautiful picture there. And there's the landing coming down. Carlton had a series of this, and that is a spacecraft on pad 16 over in the back that I don't know much about. I think it's an electronic satellite. Sorry I didn't whip off all the pictures, but this was the 53rd, Marty, flight off of either Cape Canaveral or Kennedy Space Center this year. 53 flights. Amazing. I think there's a couple more scheduled, too. I know the morning of the 11th, which is Sunday morning, is the Japan rover that's going to be launched about 2:30 in the morning. So thank you, Carlton, for letting us share these pictures. And another good ASM friend, William Whiting, found this picture, Marty. Hey, Bill, how you doing? He said it's pretty cold and crummy up there in Michigan. And this was on a website called Michigan Milky Way. And you look at it, and what are you looking at here? Well, you're looking at the Mackinac Bridge, which is a 5-mile bridge that connects the glove of Michigan, the mainland, to the peninsula of Michigan, where Marquette, Michigan is. And that, Marty, is a moonbow coming out of the clouds on the left, and the green is aurora. So you have city lights, bridge lights, aurora, a moonbow reflecting into the water, which is not a common sight at all. Moonbows are quite rare. You have to have the right atmosphere conditions, meaning it kind of be misty type of thing. And the aurora is up about maybe 50 miles up in the sky there. So thank you, William Whiting, for sharing this beautiful picture from up there in North Michigan. We can't wait to see you back down here when you want to warm up in January. Well, I meet a lot of people on the Space Coast, and I'm very grateful for that. And this was sent to me by Wayne and Wayne Owens and his wife. Marty, I got that lifted over there. Pull in the printer. I've got my notes on this. This is a baseball signed by Dick Gordon, Alan Bean, and Ed Gibson, Apollo astronauts. Thank you very much. There, Wayne and Vicky Owens sent me this. I've been having lunch with these Apollo workers. Both of them worked on both in the Apollo and shuttle era. And they were telling me about that Wayne was at a NASA Apollo astronauts versus Rockwell International Employees ball game held at the Coco Expo Stadium about 1974. And he's got several baseballs autographed after the party. And there's one with 3 strong signatures of Dick Gordon, Alan Bean, and Ed Gibson. Ed Gibson's still with us. We'd like to effort him on our show. He was the one of the scientists on the Skylab mission there. So thank you, Wayne and Vicky, for sharing that with me. They sent me a couple others that I'll share with you on future Stay Curious episodes. Well, here is the crew of Apollo 17 that were launched and just began lunar orbit 50 years ago today, preparing for a Sunday, December 11th landing on the moon. That is Jack Schmitt on the left. And the right, you've got Ron Evans, who is the command module pilot, and of course Gene Cernan, the commander, sitting in the lunar rover. And I'm going to tease you with, we're going to reveal our good friend Chris Callie's pencil drawing of a rover on the Apollo 17 mission. So stay tuned for that and stay curious at the end of our program. Thank you, Chris, for supporting our museum. Ron Evans, I was talking with some of the guys the other day. There's Gene and Jack in the lunar module after they're getting, actually, yeah, that is in the lunar module. Isn't it, Marty? Is that the door in the background of the LEM?
Yeah, it looks like the door, but I'm not sure if that's the lunar module or...
Yeah, they'd have to be sitting kind of down in a weird place, wouldn't they, to be framed by that door. Anyway, there they are in their mission, maybe after they got into the Apollo spacecraft. Here's Ron Evans, and we just lost Gino a couple years ago, and he did several great documentaries on there. And then here's Ron Evans, and Ron Evans died in his mid-50s, over 20 years ago. We were talking with some folks. In fact, Tony Achilles, hey Tony, was telling me how young he died of a heart attack, I believe. So that's why you don't hear much about Ron Evans. Marty, you're going for your UCAC mic switch there.
No, I was going to say that looks like the hatch also, but which means it's not the lunar module.
Okay, yeah, it is the same space where they took these pictures there. Must have been after they got, because they're cleaned up there and all, after they got in the command module there. There's Jack Schmitt in the lunar module, no doubt, with those triangular wings. My good, our friend and our co-producer, Marty, you stood, you know exactly where he stood at. Any comment about that above him, that type of covering? What did that feel like? Was that a plastic? Was it canvas? Was it?
That one, I forget, we had plastic and we had canvas. I believe that's the canvas one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that was just a cover of over some of the electronic wires and so
Yeah.
forth to clean it up.
Yeah.
And so you're very familiar with that area there, I'm
Yes.
sure. So obviously, look at Schmitt, how dirty he is. That moon dust was horrible, dirty. 7 hours in those, you're on a desert. You can't forget that you're on a desert and sweating, and you know there is a cooling system in your self-contained spacesuit there, but nothing was ever very comfortable. Yeah, Marty.
Yeah, Doug Forrest says it's plastic.
All right.
And it could be. I mean, actually, yeah, because you look to the right, we get the arrow. That's canvas.
Okay. Hey, Doug Forrest in Los Angeles. Good to
Yeah,
see you today.
Right there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that would be plastic.
Okay.
I
Pliable,
don't
obviously.
think it was plastic. It was because it had to be fire retardant.
Yeah, it had to be fireproof also. So it's a special material there, in there, and you see the some wires looping around in there. So Schmitt on the moon. There he is. You can tell that that's Schmitt and not Cernan because the commander had a red stripe on his helmet and on his around his arms and the calves of his legs, or the thighs of their legs, so that you could distinguish who was who. Both of them had cameras, and took a ton of photos. I'm going to be talking about those photos in a minute. This is Taurus Littrow, which they thought had a volcanic influence. Also, they went to a place where debris unearthed from the crater Tycho was unearthed and thrown on the moon and landed a couple hundred miles away, and they landed hopefully in one of those piles they were looking for of that lunar regolith ejected out of the crater Tycho. This is 50 years ago. We've never seen this before. The rovers had their own TV camera and radio dish to catch and send signals, so they could get. So wherever the astronauts were in the rover, scientists at Earth and other geologist friends of Schmitt could say, "Hey, I'm looking at that rock over there. Why don't you go over there and turn that over and see what's under it? We think it's such and such." So quite a long. They had 3 EVAs. And we'll elaborate some more on that Tuesday when we blast them off the moon on Stay Curious. But I'm going to share with you a little bit my personal experiences with Mr. Jack Schmitt. I found him to be a very amiable person, but I also found him to be not very forthcoming about talking about anything except the science of the moon and the geology of it. He, like most astronauts, he didn't get weepy eyes and want to write a poem and so forth, looking at the Earth's marble there on the surface of the moon or his experiences there, though some astronauts like Al Worden have written poetry about their experience on the moon. And then Alan Bean, of course, become a famous artist writing his impressions of the moon. Harrison Schmitt is not like that. He's all science and geology. In fact, and what you don't know back in these days, and this is 13, 14 years ago, this picture, they wouldn't autograph things because they were under contract by various companies around the country that they would only sign for them at certain times. And so Kim Poor's art outfit in Arizona, they were one of the outlets where you could send stuff and astronauts would sign it for a fee and then they'd send it back to you. But that was like twice or three times a year they would do that. So, but he would sign his book. All right, we'll see his book here in a minute called Return to the Moon, and it's all about harvesting the oxygen-3 and other elements on the moon that are completely self-sustaining on a lunar voyage. And I took this photo of him. I was hired. The many times I met him, he was at the University of Tennessee, and I'll tell you a personal story about that next slide here. And then he was hired to be hang out and be the eye candy for a original play called Blue Sky Boys. And I'm looking on my notes on the Blue Sky Boys. It was a very interesting play at the Barter Theater in Abingdon, Virginia. This is a famous theater where Ernest Borgnine and Gregory Peck got their start. And it was the Blue Sky Boys was named that because they thought that if they were just going to kind of, I call it throwing spaghetti on the wall, your ideas, and they were blue skying the ideas of going to the moon. And I found it quite entertaining, and I've never seen it on Broadway or anything. But he was there for that premiere, and he did a lot of things, 3 days with the kids. Over 100 kids built model rockets out in a nice big open grassy area across from Barter Theater, and launched them. And I'll show you a couple pictures of that here in a minute. But we're going to talk about him being at the University of Tennessee and his lectures, talking about going back to the moon. So the first time he talked was at the inaugural. He was the inaugural speaker at the Howard Baker Center of Peace. Now, Howard Baker was the press secretary for President Richard Nixon. And so this was a big deal that Schmitt came to open up this center. And so where I was in Bristol, Johnson City, Bristol, Tennessee, Kingsport, Tennessee, called the Tri-Cities. That's the airport's name. Closer to Asheville, North Carolina than Knoxville. About an hour and a half drive to Knoxville, a little over an hour. And we ran down there with a couple carloads of astronomy guys and girls to see his talk. It was in the evening. And we get there. I remember it was kind of a cold winter day in January. And we all pile out of the cars. And I say, well, I've got to go to the bathroom real quick, everybody. And there I am with Mr. Schmitt. So I go in the bathroom and I go to the urinal, and someone goes to the urinal beside me, which I thought was one of my buddies, and I turn around and doing my business, and there is moonwalker Harrison Jack Schmitt standing beside me at the men's urinal at the Center of Peace, Howard Baker Center in University of Tennessee. This is the photograph taken afterwards, as I jokingly said to him, I'll make sure I wash my hands real good before we go outside and I shake your hand. He laughed. So this keep calm and set SCE to AUX is something that went around the space hipsters community. We all had to buy that t-shirt because that's the famous words that a controller whose name escapes me told Apollo 12 when they were hit by lightning and all the electricity fell out, and set SCE to aux was what was. And Alan Bean reached over his head, knew right where that switch was, and everything was fine. The instrument unit on that Saturn V rocket saved their lives literally as it kept that mighty Saturn V roaring on that Apollo 12 launch in November 1969. So, shared the urinal with Jack Schmitt, and then he's standing there after his picture was made, and he said, funny thing comes to mind that he always called Gene Cernan my commander. They weren't the best of friends. We'll talk a little about that, and we have with Nick Thomas on Others Stay Curious. But he said he chuckled. He says, that reminds me of something my commander told me when I first became an astronaut. And I said, what was that? And he said, never pass a restroom. And he said it's true, because you get mobbed by people, and all of a sudden time slips by, and you wish you could have stopped in that restroom Good guy. Really, he really is a great guy. And people that have known him for years, a little standoffish, like I said, because he doesn't like the astronaut worshipers or sycophants, I call them. And not that he doesn't like them. He just has, he just doesn't, not on that level on there. But he's mellowed out. A lot of people are telling me they've seen him at events the last couple of years. He's mellowed out. Marty, you being involved with the Grumman reunions that they would meet at 5-year intervals and 10-year intervals of some of these of your missions. Just speak a little bit that though a nice guy, Jack Schmitt's been kind of hard to get involved with your group, right?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well,
I have a hard time getting him to attend.
You got to twist his arm to come to your events, and he's not jumped on the wagon like Charlie Duke and Jack Lausma and your dear friend Fred Hayes.
True. Right.
True. Okay, I'm not putting you on the spot there. Say something you shouldn't. But he's different than those guys, and but I think he's mellowing out. Here's a good buddy of mine from Tennessee, great astronomy buddy of mine, Paul Lewis there, and I tell Paul he's saying to Jack Schmitt there, "Hey Jack, let me hold $1." And Jack's going in his pocket to give him $1. But this is Mr. Larry Taylor, who's passed away and really responsible for some of the lunar regolith artificial stuff going out there and the research on it. And this is the gentleman that brought Schmitt to the University of Tennessee. They learned their craft together. So, well, what Schmitt would always say and still says, because I checked it out, all right, is he had a plan to save NASA, and this is about 2006 is when this visit is of his, maybe 2008. And he wanted to create the National Space Exploration Administration. Jack Schmitt would open his conversations and say, "I know how to fix NASA." And everybody go, "Yes, how do you fix NASA?" Because NASA wasn't doing anything, all right, and had no plans 10 years ago. We had the Constellation program on the board. And so when he said, "I know how to fix NASA," everybody leans forward and he says, "Fire everybody over age 40. And what? Fire me? Well, yes, because you're not going to any more training seminars. You're not in the pipeline of the latest science going on. You're just padding your Social Security for your retirement at age 40 or 45, he said. And, of course, you look back at the Apollo era, everybody in those rooms, including Marty, in their 30s and under, except the guys in the suits. Same way with SpaceX today. A lot of young people in those consoles and so forth. So, but he had this whole NSEA, and his book is called, here's his book, Return to the Moon. I'm looking over if I have my copy of it in here. He would sign that after you bought the book and put a warm salutation in there. But it's all about the science of it. There's about 3 pages in there of how the feelings of being on the moon, and that's okay. That's certainly okay. But what he expounded in this was, you create a deep space program. And he would open this up by saying, "We let it all go. We did not advertise our investment we put into Apollo. We walked away, and I believe history will judge us harshly," is what he has said time and time again as the 12th and last moonwalker. And this is 12 years ago, talking about the new Constellation manned space program. It just gets us where we were 40 years ago. So, Marty, the same can be said about Artemis, just getting us where we were 50 years ago. You agree with that, my friend, working on that?
Yep, sure do.
We've not had a coherent space policy since Apollo, said Senator Schmitt. With the shuttle, we lost our deep space capabilities, and today we do not know how to do interplanetary travel. Of course, you're going to say, Mr. Schmitt, That's what is the Orion and Artemis program is all about, and they have gone to the moon, deep space, but not with people yet. All right, and as wonderful as that launch was of Artemis on November 16th, it didn't affect me like it's going to when they put humans on that to orbit the moon. Schmitt would say things like being a spacefaring nation is just as important now as it was 50 years ago. We need sustained funding and a national commitment. And do we have that? I'll let you decide. But he encouraged cooperation with private companies there on the bottom, and that has happened. Lunar and planetary exploration science divisions being created. You need robotic precursors built by JPL and other other entities, and Human Deep Space Flight Planning Operations Center he wanted to create. That would, and there's his book, that would return, it would raise, he said, the geopolitical stature of the U.S. And confidence in the American people. It would augment defense-related and industry base, stimulate engineering and science, lay technology base for lunar settlement, bridge the operational divide between the moon and Mars, all right? And that going from the moon to Mars is not, it's like 100-fold step, folks. People underestimate what's involved there, particularly with the radiation, feeding people, and keeping, and if you get sick. Create inherent capability for asteroid eminent defense, okay? And we demonstrated that. Something that he encouraged. And I said this was about 2006, 2007 is when these slides were taken off of his talk there. And it hasn't changed. I looked it up some of the other day. And but he brought back 204. So anyway, what do you think about that, Marty? Kind of rings true to what's happening today, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and partially, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Not all across the board, though.
Right. But he had a vision.
Yeah.
And a concrete vision. And this was to supplement what was going on with the Constellation program that is now the Artemis program with a different Constellation had the same Orion spacecraft. All right. And we launched one of them on a solid fuel rocket. I forget what that was called. Ares? Yeah, Ares. And so they swapped out the Ares solid fuel rocket for the SLS and use up and throw away those beautiful the SSMEs of the shuttle program. So, well, let's just give you a little insight to this man. And he is the youngest of the 12 moonwalkers alive at age 87. Charlie Duke is just a couple months older at 87, born in October, and Schmitt was born in July. They're just a few months apart there. The 90-year-old or 89 years old, I forget, is Apollo 15's David Scott. And, of course, the oldest moonwalker alive is Buzz Aldrin at age 92. So 4 of the 12 left, Marty, and my gosh, they're all past the longevity tables of insurance, all right? So God bless them. We hope we can keep them around a while. Jack was really, like I said, a good guy to be around. This is at that theater. My good friend Bob Smith there getting a book autographed. He would answer questions, and I annoyed him when I asked him 2 days apart. I said, everybody says the moon smells like a spent fireplace or gunpowder. It smells like gunpowder. There's an impact thing. Is that correct? He says, yes, it is. Sure it is. And I said, then, well, I talked to John Young a couple times, and he said it was itchy like fiberglass on his arm. And Schmitt said, well, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that. And I go, well, Young said he felt that. And he says, well, I'm telling you, I didn't feel that. Kind of like that to me. I'm going, okay. So he kind of got a little irritated with me asking him that question, I think, Marty. But they were in two different parts of the moon, and there could be something to that. And I don't know if there is or isn't. But he would do anything you wanted. We had, like I said, 100 kids. Look at that little kid there being a spaceman. Thumbs up. Schmitt loving it. He's dressed down to play with 100 kids making these play rockets that they launched off on this grounds. A beautiful day that was. And me being a professional photographer, and he now was familiar with me, having seen me 3 or 4 times. And then when this event I was hired for to cover him at, I went up to him the first day and said, "Hey, I'm not stalking you. I'm hired to be here, and so you know that, and you're a politician, so smile." He's a great smile, and he looks quite youthful. So I said, "Would you please do me a favor and just give me a personal pose, or a personal casual pose as a photographer?" And so I'm kind of proud of that shot of casual Jack Schmitt there. I liked how his shirt matched the background, is kind of what I was going for there. Mark Usiak, my fellow photographer out there. So we'll get, those are my personal tales with him. Like I said, a very gracious man. He didn't like politics that much. He was just a one-time senator. I'm not sure if he ran again. But I think he got very frustrated with politics. I've heard him talk at other events about that. But here he is, that we have our green screen behind him there. The Challengers, the name of the lunar module. America was the name of the command module. And there's a nice picture of him on the moon, one of the classic shots of him just covered with dirt. We've talked about that. This lunar regolith and soil has been bombarded by micrometeorites for millions of years and churned up like fluffy, dry snow up there on a low humidity day in Michigan, where Larry Pusker is, and Dave Stange and William Whiting. We got a lot of good friends from Michigan. So this is going to be a problem. What's a micrometeorite, by the way? A dust mote going at 30,000 miles an hour. When it hits something, it's going to make a little impact, and you churn those up like little gnats, or as we call them down here, no-see-ums, that bite you the crap out of your legs. And over millions of years, this is a fluffy soil that they call regolith. It's been churned up, flipped over sometimes by meteorite impacts, and it gets everywhere. And this is going to be a big problem keeping equipment clean. And Harrison Schmitt got a little bit of a respiratory cough from inhaling some of this inside the lunar module. So this could be, they're going to have to test this for things like mesothelioma and asbestos diseases. Well, I want to turn you all on to one of my favorite places to look at pictures like these. And I can literally spend, an hour just cruising these pictures. I've talked about it before at Flickr. Flickr Apollo Archives, I pulled off these little rows of the actual magazines of the Hasselblad cameras are put on Flickr in a row, just like the film strip of that 70 millimeter Hasselblad, and I'm going about that many inches is a Hasselblad, 35 millimeter. You know what that is, twice as wide. Where's my 35 millimeter? Over there. I don't have it. Anyway, this film on there. So this is a sample of what the pages look like there, and you just click on that and look, Marty, 150 photos, 151 photos, just hundreds and hundreds of photos taken on Apollo 17. You know how many photos were taken by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11, Marty? Yeah. Less than 100. I think about 87 photos are categorized on the surface of the moon and in the lunar module on this. Heck, I've seen more photos of your dinners that you're having on vacation on Facebook. But it was quite an amazing process with these photos. Tom Usiak, go revisit a program Tom and I did together about that on there. So I'm turning you on to Flickr up there at the top left, and you go to Apollo Archives Flickr, and you can see any photo and do anything you want with it. Okay, in these photos, don't all look great. You're going to see where the great photos that you're familiar with are cropped. Like you may see a frame like this, not where there was a solar flare that lit up the lunar sky. This is somehow this frame of film got exposed to light before it was developed, and it got flashed in there. So you'll see and a lot of overexposures. Oh my gosh, these guys were not photographers. They overexposed so much, hardly underexposed anything. Marty, in the upper left-hand corner of that picture is your LM12. Can you see it? Why don't you point that out to everybody? They're probably about a mile or less than a mile away, but this is the Alsep. There it is right there, right in the hills of Taurus Littrow. On the moon, when you look at that big full moon going up the last few nights, you take the center of the moon and go about 2 o'clock, about halfway between the center of the moon and the edge of the moon, about 2 o'clock. That's about where Taurus Littrow is. Isn't that right, Doug Forrest? He may know that. Hazel Banks, thanks you. We enjoyed seeing you. And Miss Armstrong, Cheryl Armstrong, a NASA woman that worked for NASA in the Apollo program, dropped off some serious of her things for us to take care of here at the American Space Museum. So it was good to see you, Hazel. Cynthia Rossi, thank you for being such a loyal Stay Curious watcher. Tom Musiak, we've shouted out to you. Ophelia Sauterol, good to see you, young lady, in France. The big game, France and England tomorrow, Marty, in football over there. And Chris Freely, thank you, Chris. No relation to Ace Frehley of the rock and roll band. Ace Frehley is with the band. What am I thinking of? My brain's not working today. They wear the costume. Marty, you don't know who I'm talking about. They wear the face paint on there. Any rate, you check out this website of Flickr. You're not going to be disappointed. You'll see things like that. I like seeing this picture. That's got some motion to it, it seems like. I can just feel the lunar rover driving by the lunar module there, okay? And what I wanted to mention was only the command module pilot, or not the command module pilot, only the commander drove the rover. He never, the only ones that drove the rover were David Scott, John Young, and Gene Cernan. And I asked, I think Charlie Duke, Marty, at that event we were at, if he ever got to drive the rover, and he said no. And John's reason was that if something messed up, didn't want you responsible for it. All right. And so, but they never let the other guy sit in the driver's seat there. So, and we discussed that earlier, that Doug Forrest thinks that there might be something with their backpacks and how that chair was that allowed that to be the only way to happen on there. So, so we've got that nice shot there. We've got the, this is probably one of the last pictures of himself that Jack Schmitt took on the moon. He took a picture of me in my shadow. We've been showing you the last picture of a human on the moon when Gene Cernan took a picture of his shadow before turning around to go up the ladder. This is over at one of these mortars that they would, after they left the moon, there was all these 8 or 10 mortars on the moon that would fire discharges, so the seismometers left by the different Apollo landings could get a tone of what's going on inside the moon on there. And of course, this very famous photograph of Gene Cernan in the driver's seat of the lunar rover. You can see it's in motion because there's dust kicked up by the wheels there. And our good friend, Mr. Chris Calley, we unveiled to you an original new piece of artwork by Chris Calley there, the rendition of this lunar drive recreated there. Whoop, let me go back here. My drama effects there going back and forth on there. And you see that Chris added up an artistic element there, the Earth in the background. So how cool is that? I meant to put your dad's picture of the rocket launch on the same thing there, Chris. Sorry I didn't do that. But we showed you earlier this week Chris Callie's famous father, Paul Callie. They stood on the hood of a station wagon during the launch of Apollo 16, and he made a sketch of that. I'm remiss I didn't add that with yours, but we'll revisit this Monday, I'm sure. So one of the things about going to the moon, Marty, that they all say was we actually discovered the Earth. And this is the most famous Earth shot of all the Apollo images taken by Apollo 17. Not sure which astronaut. I don't think any of them really claim credit to it. There is Antarctica on the bottom, and of course Africa with the Middle East in the middle there. The beautiful blue marble. 70% of us are ocean, and just 30 of it is that beautiful land that we hold so dear and don't realize how tenuous we are out there on spaceship Earth. And like Nicole Stott, our friendly astronaut, says, we need to treat each other as crewmates, not passengers, on our spaceship Earth and help keep our planet alive. So, Marty, anything we need to say hi to or fix up before we leave?
Well, just an update. Took Forrest said the picture with Gene and Jack. That was some of the lower equipment.
It was not a good night for Kiss. I think they did that 2 or 3 times. Anyway, Marty, guess what? We're probably going to see each other Sunday morning again, right?
Yep.
We're going to go out and see astronaut Mark Brown and support the astronaut encounter out there at Kennedy Visitors Complex. And then after we get our swag autograph by Mr. Brown, we're going to go over to Atlantis, and on the green lawn behind Atlantis, they're going to have a landing party for Artemis. Artemis is planned splashdown at 12:40 p.m., and you know that's going to happen on time or there's something wrong with those rocket scientists. And so they're going to be streaming live starting at 11 o'clock on a big screen behind the Atlantis building. So if you're going to be on the Space Coast this weekend or a season pass holder out there at the American Space Museum, or not the American Space Museum, at the Kennedy Visitors Center complex out there, Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. Got to say it right, Marty. If you are a pass holder out there, and why wouldn't you want to be if you live here? It's $150, free parking, and unlimited access to an astronaut every day. So Orion will have spent 25 days in space, having launched November 16th, landing December 11th, Sunday at 12:40 p.m. And that will still give me time, Marty, to get and hear the first quarter of the football games. So I look forward to seeing you out there, my friend, with Anita and Connie probably out there with us. We love supporting the people who support us out there. So, Marty, you have a good weekend, and thank you all for allowing me to indulge in my personal accounts of Mr. Jack Schmitt, person I'll never forget being around. Can't wait to see him again. Hope he comes to the Grumman reunion in April that Marty's putting together. So I want to say thank you to everybody for supporting our museum, and personally, thank you to Daniel DeYoung and Tony Achilles for spending some time with me here in our studio, as well as having a delicious lunch together. Thank you, Tony. Next time it'll be on me. So until next week, when we crank it up again and bring you stories about America's great space program and current events of the day, I'm Marquette saying I can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us.